In 1930, 4 million Americans were without work. By 31, unemployment had doubled.
They used to tell me I was building a dream with peace and glory ahead. Why should I be standing in line, just waiting for bread?
President Hoover kept saying that prosperity was just around the corner, but by 1932, few believed him. 15 million were without jobs and growing desperate. That spring, World War I veterans living in Portland and Seattle were on their way to Washington to petition Congress for early payment of their Army bonus. Thousands of veterans joined them, and in railroad yards all over the country, they climbed aboard trains heading east.
Once I built a tower.
By summer, more than 20,000 veterans, many with wives and children, were crowded into tents, abandoned buildings, and hastily built shacks in Washington. Though their protests were peaceful, the president considered them radicals and communists and refused to meet with them. So the bonus army carried its protest to the steps of the Capitol, and while Congress debated, they waited with their families on the grass. When word came that the Senate had said no, they stood and sang America. Without money or a place to go, thousands of defeated veterans stayed on in Washington. When a conflict with police in late July left 2 veterans dead, Hoover ordered General Douglas MacArthur to take charge. Believing revolution was in the air, the general called out the troops. Government workers were just leaving downtown offices as mounted troops and tanks were coming down Pennsylvania Avenue. At first, both veterans and bystanders thought it was a show of support for the ex-soldiers. As tear gas filled the air, the government's intention became clear. Veterans with wives and children retreated towards their main camp at Anacostia, and MacArthur's forces followed in pursuit, driving the veterans and their families from the city and burning the camp to the ground. Many Americans were critical of the Army's action, and the president was blamed. Though the Republicans renominated Hoover for a second term, his reputation was in shambles. Once considered a brilliant engineer and great humanitarian, Hoover now seemed incompetent and unfeeling. And Franklin Roosevelt, calling for a New Deal, swept to a landslide victory in the fall elections. By Inauguration Day, the banking system had collapsed. All over the country, thousands of banks had failed as investors rushed in panic to withdraw their savings. The mood was desperate, and Americans turned anxiously to their radios.
The thing we have to fear is fear itself. And I am certain that on this day, my fellow Americans expect that on my induction into the presidency, I will address them with a candor and a decision which the present situation of our people impels. This nation is asking for action, and action now.
And Roosevelt took action. Calling the Congress into special session, he introduced emergency banking legislation and declared a bank holiday. And for a few days, we all learned to live without money. Things were changing fast. When Roosevelt declared, "I think it's time for beer," Congress quickly agreed. For the first time in more than a decade, you weren't breaking a law by having a drink. During the first 100 days, Congress was busy, creating dozens of new federal programs to bring relief, recovery, and reform. Signs of change were everywhere. People were going back to work. By fall, the president had reason to be optimistic.
That at least 4 million have been given employment. Or saying it another way, 40% of those seeking work have found it. Our troubles will not be over tomorrow, but we are on our way, and we are headed in the right direction.
In Germany, the right direction meant Adolf Hitler. His program sounded quite different from those of FDR. Many, including the new president, were worried. Events in Asia also caused concern. The president could meet Japanese diplomats at the White House with his wife, but he could do little about Japanese aggression in the Far East. In September 1931, Japan had invaded Manchuria, and there were army rumors about taking all of China. By 1933, Adolf Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany, and stormtroopers marching in the streets of Berlin had become a common sight. In violation of the Versailles Treaty, Germany was rearming. In Italy, Benito Mussolini's black shirts were also marching. By 1935, Italian forces had taken Ethiopia. By 36, students in Peking were marching too, protesting Japan's tightening grip on China. War seemed imminent. In Spain, war had already begun. When civil war broke out in 1936, Hitler and Mussolini sent planes and tanks to support the right-wing revolution led by Francisco Franco. Many Americans were getting worried. Some were speaking out.
I have seen war. I have seen war on land and sea. I have seen blood running from the wounded. I have seen men coughing out their gasped lungs. I have seen the dead in the mud. I have seen cities destroyed. I have seen 200 limping, exhausted men come out of line, the survivors of a regiment of 1,000 that went forward 48 hours before. I have seen children starving. I have seen the agony of mothers and wives. I hate war.
There was little more Roosevelt could do. U.S. military forces were weak. Moreover, sentiment in America at the time was more accurately reflected by the isolationists, like Senator Gerald Nye of North Dakota.
Americans want no more war. Most of all, they want no more participation in foreign wars.
By the fall of 1937, there were other foreign wars. Japan was bombing China, and the wife of General Chiang Kai-shek scout.
I am speaking to you just as the echoes of exploding bombs have died down. Death comes from the clear blue sky, just as it has come to thousands of our innocent people throughout the length and breadth of our land.
Her words were warning to the West.
That no nation could carry on such wanton destruction and yet retain the respect of the world.
In March of '38, Hitler swallowed Austria. By fall, German demands for the Sudetenland, the German-speaking area of Czechoslovakia, brought Europe to the brink of war. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain flew to Germany and met with Hitler to discuss the Czech crisis. The Munich Agreement gave Hitler what he wanted. Chamberlain flew home and announced that he had secured peace with honor, peace in our time. Others called it appeasement. Within days, Hitler was listing his next victims in the Reichstag, while rounding up Jews in the streets of Germany.
Romanian, Yugoslavian.
By the fall of '39, Europe was at war. Without warning, Hitler's armies invaded Poland on September 1st. Within 3 days of the Nazi blitzkrieg, Britain and France had declared war. In America, the president called Congress into special session to consider the European crisis, then spoke to Americans by radio.
This nation will remain a neutral nation, but I cannot ask that every American remain neutral in thought as well. I have said not once but many times that I have seen war and that I hate war. I say that again and again. I hope the United States will keep out of this war. I believe that it will.
In the 30s, the Depression was everywhere. In the cities, those without jobs took to the streets, selling apples, pretzels, paper bags, even underwear. Some who lost their homes drifted into shanty towns called Hoovervilles that mushroomed around every city dump. Men fought each other over garbage. Many went hungry. Some even starved. During the worst years of the Depression, millions roamed the land, becoming hobos, hopping freights, begging or stealing to stay alive. And bodies like those of dead men were everywhere. Radicals and reactionaries gained power as people searched for leadership and answers. As frustration turned to fear and anger, people took to the streets. Communists led hunger marches in many big cities and attracted thousands. The week before Americans went to the polls in '32, 20,000 unemployed filled the streets of Chicago. Sometimes there were confrontations with police, like in Brooklyn in 1933. Soon after taking office, Roosevelt made it clear that he would be president of all the people, including those at the bottom of the economic ladder.
In the working out of a great national program that seeks the primary good of the greater number, it is true that the toes of some people are being stepped on and are going to be stepped on. But these toes belong to the comparative few who seek to retain or to gain position or riches or both by some shortcut that is harmful to the greater good. The program of the past year...
While FDR became a hero to the common man, he also got the support of the middle-class housewife.
Now the federal government and the whole country realizes consumer prosperity is the best policy. We must rid ourselves of the fear of fear. And we must cooperate with our great president under the Blue Eagle and his plan to the fullest extent of our power. We must not fail it.
Father Coughlin, the radio priest, with an audience of millions, added his support.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the day, despite all opposition to the contrary, that you remain steadfast behind the one man who can save this civilization of ours. It is either Roosevelt or ruin.
Above all,
Fighting the Depression was something like fighting a war, and the president made special appeals to youth.
it is for the new generation to participate in the decision and to give strength and spirit and continuity to our government and to our national life.
Some New Deal programs were controversial, but not the CCC. The Civilian Conservation Corps was the New Deal's most popular program. It enlisted 20-year-olds from the ranks of the unemployed and sent them off to camps, run jointly by the Forest Service and the Army. Each man was paid $30 a month to fight forest fires, dig irrigation ditches, and plant trees. But probably more important than the trees planted or the fires put out was the hope given to the 2.5 million who joined the CCC. Many were less fortunate. Thousands of farmers, unable to pay rent or mortgages, lost their land and took to the road in a fruitless search for work. Then, as if things weren't bad enough, the winds came and turned the Great Plains into a giant dust bowl. Farms that weren't buried were blown away. Topsoil was carried as far east as New York and Connecticut. So, with mattresses and hopes tied on rooftops and running boards, they said goodbyes and began the Great Migration west to California. 250,000 in the 30s made the trip. But when they got where they were going, they found most jobs gone, already taken by those who got there months before. Then came the floods. From the Ohio to the Hudson, rivers went on the rampage in 36. Parts of downtown Pittsburgh were 10 feet underwater. Just after Christmas, the floods hit Johnstown, Pennsylvania. leaving 900 dead and 500,000 homeless. For a generation, conservationists had been warning this would happen. Many of the games we played in the 30s were ones we played at home. They were cheap. Bridge became popular with the middle class, and words like Trump and no Trump were heard in living rooms from Atlanta to Los Angeles. Jigsaw puzzles, too, became a craze. Department stores sold millions to Depression-era Americans who could at least get the satisfaction of making some sense out of the chaos in front of them. Those who tried to do two things at once were gambling, but almost everyone seemed to be taking chances. When the bingo caller hollered B29, it could be profitable if you had the right card. We even went to the movies in the 30s, hoping to win cash. Pinball machine first appeared in 1932. While you might get satisfaction, you couldn't win as you could with the one-armed bandits. We dropped 15 billion nickels into these slots in the 30s, more money than we spent on shoes. We spent much larger sums betting on the horses. The Hollywood racetrack opened in the 8 and drew daily crowds of 40,000. All across the country, state and local governments relaxed laws against betting, and some of us got a little more reckless with the scarcest of all commodities, money. During the Depression, Saturdays meant baseball to most sports fans. For the first time, Saturday became a day off, even for those of us with jobs.
And if you fall once and for all.
Millions spent Saturday afternoons at ballparks, eating Cracker Jack and hot dogs. Everybody seemed to have a baseball hero in the 30s. New York Yankee Joe DiMaggio. In 1937, in his second year with the team, DiMaggio headed the American League with 46 home runs. By 39, he had helped the Yankees to 4 consecutive victories in the World Series. On the international scene, there were other contests for Olympic stakes. None more dramatic than in Berlin in 36. For the Nazis, it was to be a demonstration that there was no finer athlete than the Aryan. We are the master race, the Führer proclaimed, and expected German athletes to prove it. But Hitler hadn't counted on a black American from Cleveland named Jesse Owens, who ran to 3 gold medal victories in Berlin and was called the fastest man in the world. On his return, Jack Dempsey met him at the dock.
On behalf of the Mayor of New York, I extend you greetings and best wishes and welcome you back home. And I know everyone in America is happy to see you and wish you every good wish and success. Miss Owens, same thing to you.
During the Depression, Charles Lindbergh's life seemed almost like a dream come true. His flight to Paris made him the greatest hero of his generation. Idolized by millions, everything he did was news. His marriage to Anne Morrow, daughter of a diplomat. The retreat they built in New Jersey to escape an adoring public. Their first child, Charles Jr. When the Lindbergh baby was kidnapped in March 32, the dream turned into nightmare. For weeks, the search for the baby was